back to check just one more time.
Okay, so we're starting.
We will be live in just a second.
Okay.
Refresh here. All right, we're live.
Welcome. Welcome to the Wordsmiths reading series from Bucks County Community College. I'm Ethel Racken, and it's such a pleasure to introduce tonight's readers. But before I do, I'd like to thank Dean Nicole Tracy, the Department of Language and Literature, the Cultural Affairs Committee, Jean Dolan, Damon Honeycutt, and Christopher Bursk. We're so fortunate to have two marvelous writers with us tonight. Our first reader is Cheryl Baldy. A resident of Bucks County for more than 40 years, Cheryl Baldy is a former Bucks County Poet Laureate and finalist for the Robert Fraser Award for Poetry. She's taught at Bucks County Community College, worked as a freelance editor, and served as co-facilitator for community-based workshops exploring women's lives through literature. A finalist for the 2006 Francis Locke Memorial Award, her work also was nominated for 2008 Best New Poets Anthology. Her collection of poems, The Shapelessness of Water, was published in 2018. She's currently working on a second collection, In the Golden Hour, Cormorants. In Cheryl's poetry, all of the elements shift and shine. As the shore meets the sea, the speaker's finely tuned lyrical voice pierces through morning with a revelatory poetry of deep wisdom and rare emotional reach. Baldi vividly paints the world we recognize of human connection, sensual pleasure, and activity, while also deftly guiding us to face that shadow world of undertow and beyond. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Ethel, for that lovely introduction and for inviting me to read. It is a real pleasure. Also, I want to thank Bucks County Community College, all the people that you listed for their ongoing support for the Wordsworth reading series, especially in this time when it has been so challenging. I think it's terrific that we still provide those opportunities to the community. Carole, it was great to meet you, however briefly. I hope sometime in the future we can meet in person. Always, I want to give a shout out to Chris Bursk for all the mentoring that he has done to so many of us in this community. And of course, to this wonderful community of friends and fellow writers who are a source of constant inspiration and support. So I'm going to read some few older poems and also some poems from this new manuscript, which is in progress. Just to give you a little bit of background, when I was working on The Shapelessness of Water, which is an elegiac work, I promised myself that when I finished it, I would not write any more elegies. And then my sister died. So I was sort of back in the muck of it. I initially, after her death, wrote an essay for myself, mostly because I did not want to forget anything. And I tucked it away and brought it out a year and a half ago and read through it again. And I thought, this is just not doing the work that I wanted it to do. I had already forgotten some things, and it just felt as if it wasn't honoring the experience of her illness and death. So I moved on to poetry, and that is the genesis of this manuscript. I do have to say, I feel a little uncomfortable or a little unsure about reading elegies tonight in the face of how terribly sad and scary and stressful and challenging this past year has been for all of us, but particularly for those who have been ill, who have lost loved ones, who haven't had food, who've lost their jobs. But I also know that there is truly no better audience to read to in terms of this material. So I thank you all for both your patience and trusting me with this work. So this poem: not this, not you dying, I whisper, driving, not knowing the way, only north. Whisper under my breath as the doctor reads from the chart. Thickened tissue, enlarged air sacs, stiff fibrotic tissue at the lungs base. Whisper as techs in pea green suits take you for yet another scan, return you shivering, no news, or none they will share. Your jaw firm, your milky white eyes staring at your feet at the base of your bed. Clubbed toes, clubbed fingers, the first sign we missed. You say nothing this day or the next while we wait, whisper. Open the curtains to the blue September sky, fall, season of birth, season of death. And whatever happened, whatever damage to your lungs, virus, toxin, grain dust, bird droppings from the barn, happened decades ago. It happened in childhood. My sister, 3 years ago, started to lose weight. She was 5 years older than I and had always been extremely healthy, took very good care of herself. And she was losing weight, but she had just moved from her family home in Princeton down to Long Beach Island, where we both have homes. And at first we thought, well, it was just the move. But over the next period of months, she became thinner and thinner. She developed some difficulty breathing. Was going to the doctor regularly. At first, she was diagnosed with depression, and then they changed that to anxiety. In spite of her many trips to the doctor, nobody could figure out what was going on. And then finally, she admitted herself to the hospital where they found out that she had advanced stage pulmonary fibrosis. There's no cure for it. When they discharged her into hospice, they gave us 6 months, maybe 12 months for her to live, and she lived 6 days. So we were recalibrating constantly. One of the things that is still difficult to reconcile is the fact that oops, can you hear me? Well, I'm just going to proceed. That pulmonary fibrosis, there's no cure. Oftentimes it's idiopathic, but in her instance, it wasn't. There was some exposure to some kind of toxin. Salt creeks. Salt creeks is just the salt marsh or the marshlands, the wetlands that you see when you are coming onto the island. How old when we first sailed from the bay deep into the wetlands, pulling the wooden dinghy onto shore. At low tide, eelgrass pulsed in the current, weaving itself through and around our legs as we waded in tide pools, clusters of moon snails and limpets anchored by the hundreds on rocks. It seemed a place of wonder, overhead the sun taking hold, the shushing of marsh reeds, a taste of salt always in the air. Only now do I think back to how the air turned heavy and the sky darkened as we returned through the narrow inlet. Above us, a commotion of wings, a gull flying off, a duckling in its black beak, where even now the heron, with its great efficient height, stalks the mudflats close by. Later, we speak in whispers, move in silence from room to room, listen to the oxygen's steady pump, moisture bubbling through the tubes. 3 days unresponsive. I sit with you until someone else comes in. Years from now, I will remember these moments, the counters scattered with crumbs from half-eaten sandwiches, the tide low, winds calm. Cormorants still perched, motionless in a line along the pilings. At first, they seem an omen, messengers from the dead. But I will wonder later, perhaps they were something other. Mournful attendants or angels, their black wings spread wide against the late day burn. Cormorants, for those of you who don't know what they look like, they're quite large birds. Very black, they look very lean. They have a long crooked neck and very long beak, and their wingspan can be anywhere from 2 to 3.5 feet. And of course, when their feathers are wet, they can't fly. So you often will see them sitting on pilings or on a dock with their wings spread straight out for long periods of time. It's quite a remarkable sight. The title of this poem is Snapper Blue. Snapper blues are bluefish, actually, but they're small bluefish. And for any of you who fish, you know that they oftentimes in the mid-Atlantic coast show up maybe mid-August, early part of September, when there is that first snap of cold weather, hence the snapper blue. This poem is a little difficult, but it was a poem I knew I had to write, and because I wrote it, I'm going to read it. After this, I'll lighten up a little bit. Snapper Blue. Rolling her to one side, then the other, the aide bathes her, wraps her in a pink sweater, props her against bed pillows to ease her breathing. The sweater absurd, as though this afternoon she will receive company. I am dizzy with fear. She should be lying down, but I am afraid to touch her, afraid to move her on my own for fear she will break into pieces. So she dies sitting up, eyes open, in a pink sweater, her jaw suddenly slack, mouth opening as she gulps air like the snapper blues we caught as kids, their tails smacking the docks as we struggled to cut lines. Snapper gulping air, eyes blue, mouth wide, a deep breath, last sweet taste of salt air, saltwater snapper, blue, her scales. I'm always surprised when someone dies, how shocking it is. Of course, if it's a sudden death, yes, it is shocking. But even in those instances where someone has been ill and the death is anticipated, it still feels just as shocking. I'm also always surprised by how much there is to do in the days following a death. It's a very busy time, which I think is a blessing in some respects. And of course, one of those things is the writing of an obituary. And after Cindy died, none of us really had the heart or the stamina to write one. So we allowed the funeral home to do it. They did the best job they could and faxed it over to us. And we tinkered with it as well as we could and returned it. But it didn't sit well with me. So many months later, I wrote my own obituary, the title of this poem. Cynthia, moon goddess, moon face, eyes cornflower blue. As a child, she carried in her back pocket night terrors, the spankings, wrapped her anger in silence, stuffed it up her sleeve. This too, hiding, glass breaking, muffled cries of her mother behind a closed door. Her father, physician, unable to heal himself, who taught her the names of bones and how to saddle and mount a horse. Her horse, with whom she shared peppermints, bits from brunch. What she hated, seafood, pollen, pretense. What she feared, being seen. And what she loved, rock and roll, Joe, tinsel at Christmas. Glittered tissue in which she wrapped gifts. Charcoal sketches she made of her cat, the groundhog by which she marked spring. Fall marked by the arrival of royal terns. Her own birdies, beloved children and their children on her porch, their voices swelling inside her as dusk settled each night over the marsh. Golden hour of osprey returning to the rookery with fish. Constellations, Cassiopeia and Orion's undying light of heaven, shapes and stories of violence and vengeance, of loss and beauty she claimed as her own. Dry toast at 6 a.m., late night TV. Darkness framed her life. But the deeper the darkness, the brighter pinpoints of light in the night sky. Moonchild, luminous. Entrance. The wildness here set her free, always wind, always the waves' refusal to hold their shape. She taught me to find the deep channels that rush from the shoreline, emptying out into the larger sea. In rough water, one can ride them straight through the breakers, a secret passage to another world where one becomes part of something larger. Endless sweep of blue sky, endless sea beneath which swells life, unknown and dangerous and thriving. Then, after. In your silence, your lips sealed as though stitched shut, you knew I would carry this for you. Not your fear or pain, not the struggle to breathe or the late afternoon light, washing your room in shadows and gold. I couldn't carry any of this, but I carried, at least I tried, the goodbyes for your children in the moments after your death, who flew apart like sparrows flushed from the crepe myrtle, or your friend who brought ginger cookies an hour too late. To each I offered some part of you, a story forbidden and likely half true from years of our forgetting and reimagining. I offered them your last words, though we never really say goodbye. At least I can't, not wanting to forget the shadows overtaking your room as light faded, or how I fear our stories, imagined so often they no longer will hold you. And finally, this is an older poem, but it seems to work here. Late into fall. Tomatoes, sun-ripened and fat, sliced thin with onion on bread. September's late sweet corn. The week she died, it's all we ate in silence at the long table as winds shifted west, hushing the sea, so it seemed a lake deep blue and forgiving. Here the water stays warm late into fall, and all she loved, bittersweet bloom of goldenrod, the wolf spider's orb this morning stretching from lamppost to bayberry, flocked with nets and dew from a fog so dense it's obscured everything, unfolds as the sun rises and burns the mist. So the beach, emptied and swept clean, comes to light. Rocks, seagrasses, sea and sky unending. And for now, any sadness or regret is released into this dazzling metallic silver light. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that beautiful reading. Carole Maso is the author of the novels Mother and Child, Ghost Dance, The Art Lover, Ava, The American Woman in the Chinese Hat, and Defiance, as well as Ariel, a book of short fictions, Break Every Rule, essays, The Room Lit by Roses, a journal of pregnancy and birth, and Beauty is Convulsive, The Passion of Frida Kahlo. She's the recipient of many awards, including a Lannan Fellowship. She's professor of literary arts at Brown University. Carole's daring original work has changed the literary landscape. As she puts it, she often resorts to a form of her own making, exploring various literary, musical, philosophical, and visual modes in order to get close to what her subject and world require. Her writing takes us on a journey, at turns and often simultaneously playful, erotic, darkly humorous, mysterious, and always moving. She creates a vibrant space in which we can luxuriate, breathe, and finally roam free. Welcome, Carole. Thank you for being with us. You're muted there. Carole, you're muted.
Can
Oh,
you hear me now?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Oh,
excellent.
God. Thank you so much for that, Ethel. So beautiful. Ethel and I met at McDowell a few falls ago and became fast friends. I miss you a lot, and I miss everything a lot. And I'm thrilled actually to be here. I know there is an audience and that I can't see or hear you, but I know you are there. So thank you all. I'm going to read the opening pages of Mother and Child, which was my last published book. And then I'm going to read something that I've just in the midst of completing now. I think oddly, the things that I've chosen to read tonight, both the pandemic was within before it ever arrived. And in some way, the way you know things before you know them, or the way things are prefigured, is part of the artistic process on some level, or that mysterious, mystical exchange. And so both of these pieces concern a wisdom that comes unbidden and unasked for. And as Aeschylus says, I'll read the quote later, against our wills. But here it is. This is the opening of Mother and Child, and it's kind of thrilling to read a little deranged bedtime story, which this book is. It's dark. It's dark in here at any rate. So, like children, I really just recommend you surrender and give into it on some level and not worry too much about anything else. Okay. The great wind came, and the maple tree that stood near the house for 200 years split in half, and from its center poured a torrent of bats. Inside, the child was stepping from her bath, and the mother swaddled her in a towel. Night was all around them. The child thought she could feel the wind moving through her and the places where her wings were beginning to come through. Soon it would be the time of the transformation, the mother said. The child said she was almost ready, but she was not ready yet. Before bed, the mother told the child a story. When your body begins to transform, you will bleed in a new way each month for several days. The child pictured herself as a fountain, a mermaid or a dolphin or a fish spouting blood and magnificence. She closed her eyes. In the children's garden, the first rose was about to open. The child's tooth was loose. She tinkered with it and listened to the mother and smelled her hard like an animal and loved her with all her heart. She felt happy to be alive in the blood conversation, and in the night and the and in the night and the world that grew deeper and stranger and somehow brighter with her mother's words. She held her arms open to the night, but her eyes closed. She could not hold on to waking life any longer. The mother looked at the sleeping child before her and indulged herself for a moment in the illusion of stasis. For a full minute, nothing changed. That evening, in the hours still left to her, after the child was asleep, the mother felt at the mercy of all things: the wind, the tree, the story, the child's beautiful and curious face, the rate at which the rose opened. Out the window, pure light flooded from the tree. She tried to look away, and though it filled her with a certain dread, she could not. Whether she was turned toward the tree or away from it, it did not matter now. The world possessed the mother, and not the other way around. She did not possess the world. She closed her eyes, but something in the empty space above her head was emphatic and hovered and would not let her rest. Like so many others, she had fled the burning city and returned to this dark wood. But she wondered now if by choosing to come back here to the place of her childhood, she was putting them at risk in some way. No one else would think that. The valley was a paradise, and in summer it attracted many vacationers and people from the city. The valley was verdant, and the silver river glistened, and on the river there were bright boats. With this, the mother must have drifted off, for when she opened her eyes, the child was standing over her, holding something glittery in her open hand. "Look," she whispered. The mother sat up. "What have you got there?" The child opened her hand. "Oh," she said, "a tooth." It was smooth and shiny, and they both admired it. "Open your mouth," the mother said, and she saw the gap where the tooth had been. Then she turned to the darkened window, and looking out, she sighed, "Soon you will be all grown." She remembered when the child was just a baby and was placed in the silver basin and raised up into the air, her arms and legs open like a star. "Tell me that story again of the silver basin and the water and the star," the child said, and she placed her stuffed lamb and her last baby tooth on the ledge. All blew in the wind, and the mother's story came in and out of audibility, but the star was constant, and the child listened. The night world pressed up against them. There was no way of partitioning it. The mother knew there was no safe place inside, though she did not like to think of it. You never knew what might be happening next. The cat rushing by with a chipmunk in his jowls, or a snake, or worse. Even her garden, without her, in only a short time, would go completely back to wilderness, to loosestrife and milkweed and nettles. A tangle of wild grasses and reeds and dark brambles would take over, and in the deepening furrows, rodents, winged and not, would come in great drifts, and moths and beetles in abundance. "Yes," she said, pulling herself back from the welter, "when you were a baby and had been placed in the silver basin and then raised up into the air by the feeble priest, you had opened. It was December, like a Christmas star, and sin was washed away." After the story was finished, the child retrieved her lamb from the sill and placed the tooth under her pillow, and the world, unfastened, blew by. There was much swirling and world being blown in backwards through the chimney to them. But at that moment, all that mattered was the child, the tooth, and the lamb. In the distance, they heard the sound of sirens. It was one of those nights, rare even in the life of a person who has lived a long time, when clarity comes. The mother looked out the window as if something long concealed could now be seen in stark relief. Even though it was night, bright light poured from the center of the felled tree. She had experienced such a fall into brightness only once, so much illuminated in an instant, so little time. Though the moment had not yet arrived, it was fast upon them. The child closed her eyes, and soon enough she was asleep once more. And though the lamb and the tooth had been removed from the sill, their traces remained, insinuating their way into the mother's consciousness. The mother would like to keep them in this moment, to stop the process now, to hold them like this a while longer, but no one was interested in what the mother wanted. Was there nothing but indifference, she wondered? She remembered last Sunday's Mass. At the service, they announced that the god was not there, and his presence in the sacred species had been relegated to a static state, and the congregants reduced to a passive presence. They would have to sit with the absence, no priest available to animate the dormant god. The child had not understood. Now all was darkness. Sometime in the night, the power had gone out. The wind had not let up. In the early morning, when she opened her eyes, the empty space above her head had been filled. The night before, a flame had descended on her head in a dream. She was sure of it, and she was afraid. There was not a soul who could help her now. She heard babbling and chatter, and the child in turn began chattering in her sleep. Something had entered the house. So that's the beginning of Mother and Child. I'm just finishing up a book now called Why So Soon Asleep? And I'm brought back to this feeling of what is unbidden and unwelcome on some level, and yet before us, you know, and writing this through several years, but, you know, when the pandemic came in March as well, shaped it on some level. It's an interesting thing that I now live in the country, very close to that tree that fell down, actually. I now live in the country, but for many, many years, I lived in New York City. And last February, I decided, very uncharacteristically, have not done this, had not done this before, to rent an Airbnb in the city. And while I was there, it was the end of February, and we did not quite know what was the catastrophe that was slowly unfolding. But I had a variety of very intense, heightened experiences, something very different than has ever happened to me before. As I said, I was working on this novel, and I seem to have visitations or visions or intimations as I was moving through the city. And I thought they were interesting at the time, and I just wrote them down. This one has become incorporated into the novel. And I don't think I have to tell you anything else, though I've truncated it for this reading. And so I hope it's okay. And there's a famous quote now by Aeschylus, because it was used by one of the Kennedys, Robert, I think, at some point. And the quote is, "Even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart. And in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God." If we entertain this at all as possibly true, we must ask now, I think, what wisdom is coming to us through these very, very difficult times. And so that's very much on my mind, because I don't know the answer to that at all. But the novel has allowed me space to explore that a little bit. So I'm going to read this very real thing, one of several, but the thing that made it into the book as I was in the city for that week at the end of February. Okay. After you've been away a long time and then come back and ride the subway again, You think you've never seen a more beautiful collection of humanity in your life. And this wonder, this feeling of astonishment holds as you ride multiple trains, uptown, downtown, crosstown, not wanting to squander your days here. Every age, every race, every creed or lack of creed, all going somewhere or nowhere, the poor and the working and the middle classes, families, couples, friends. Tourists can scarcely believe it when they ask for directions, and many are happy to assist. A world-weary Black man across from me smiles and closes his eyes. The extravagantly tattooed woman feeding her daughter a small piece of cheese from a plastic bag. The sleeping infant, she does not wake. Someone is singing Lean on Me, the Bill Withers version, we're informed. That is what he tells us. An ancient Chinese woman holds a bag of tubers. The CUNY students laugh. The two men in leather appear as if they have stepped out of the 80s. It's more sexy dress up now than anything. There's something in these aging gents that stirs the heart. Such ache and such nostalgia. How tender everyone is with each other. How gentle. That is what I cannot get over. Such radiance, something I had not experienced before. They create a world unto their own before me, belonging to no one, and yet I acknowledge their presence as a gift. Perhaps there were intimations even then that this would not last, could not last, that all of this vision was already hovering on the cusp of disappearance. In a matter of weeks from that day, the city, along with the rest of the world, would close. They create a world onto their own, encapsulated, belonging to no one, for the distance between stations on this express train. I acknowledge this communion, this vision, constantly refigured at each stop. It is as if I can see through a partition, as if a veil is lifting, and there before me, all that is beautiful and fleeting, past, present, and future gathered. At first, everything around you is calm, and then too calm, quiet, and then too quiet. Where have all the people gone? They flicker and dim. They are there, and then they are not. Where has everyone gone? Our eyes slowly closing. Not yet. Don't go until they distance and die, funneling into a pinpoint. The space yet to come. Luminous, beautiful New York. What are these intimations just out of reach that haunt us? What lies dormant in us, submerged? We're hibernating. We're sleeping all the time and we don't know it. We're dreaming that there is plenty of oxygen. The subway riders have all fallen asleep. The subway car now hurtles away. Somehow I climb up to the ground level. I'm in a park, it seems. Is it a park? The scrim lifts, a headlight from behind. White tents. Except for the tents, it looks like Central Park. Someone comes with a little machine that measures oxygen levels in the blood. She couldn't understand what was going on. Doctors in hazmat suits, photos of themselves smiling, pinned onto their white coats because their faces are obscured. I'm in here and I am smiling, the photos say. Helping patients feel a sense of human connection, to help them feel at ease. Don't be afraid. But I know we're in the midst of something, a slowly unfolding cascade of events, the park in springtime. In the dream, I'm looking for my parents. I wanted to send them flowers, for I was not allowed to visit them because New Jersey was closed. But I knew that the flowers were contaminated. I could not send them flowers for fear the flowers had become contaminated. It was late winter and no one had seen flowers for a long time. Confined to their houses, no flowers, even for weddings, even for funerals. It seemed like all the flowers in the world had vanished. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, is that the American poet tending the dying in the park? A tear in the fabric of time reveals a slowly gathering white village, tense. What are the dying worth? And what decisions are being made? Who among them are the most likely to survive? And what have we not yet learned? Not since the Civil War, a field hospital in Central Park on the East Meadow. Treatment now based on chances of survival. Since everyone cannot be treated, some must be sent home to die. The melancholy question, what are the chances of survival? A shortage of ventilators, the need for protective gear. Some doctors, some nurses wear trash bags. A shortage of tests, the word triage. The portals, the boundaries weaken and then give way. Walt Whitman nursing the injured in the field hospital during the Civil War. One can almost see him now moving through the tents, the schools, the churches, ministering to the wounded. It is not true that we will be burying people in Central Park. It is not true that there will be mass graves in the park. Do not, by the way, inject yourself with disinfectant. The newspaper. The US braces for the hardest, saddest week as virus deaths surpass 9,300. The triage tents, the portable morgues, people dying alone because the nature of the contagion, just the word. The dead Feel much closer now, she says. I close the portal for now, and it disappears. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. An amazing reading.
You're welcome. Thank you. I've never read it before. It's, in the craziest shape here.
Oh, I'm so lucky to be hearing that first.
And I had to shorten it because it goes on a bit. There's a pandemic portal of sorts that has nothing to do with the book takes place years before it. So this is flooding in from elsewhere.
Yeah. And it makes such an interesting parallel with mother and child, because threaded through you have the 9/11 events and other events that sort of morph into that, in and out of that.
Yeah, it's very much of a piece on some level. I didn't realize that, but in fact, there are things that are converging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wasn't planning to do a Q&A, so I won't burden you with that, but I just wanted to say that your elegiac poems are really beautiful, Cheryl, and it does seem like this is, like it or not, the time for elegy, and it seems both of you are doing that sort of work in very different ways, but nonetheless, the importance of elegy right now. So thank you both for your beautiful readings. And we hope to be able to read what you've read today soon in print. And thank you all for tuning in today. And please keep an eye out for our spring readings. So this is actually the final reading in our fall series, but we will be continuing on virtually this spring. So maybe the readers can stay for a minute, but we will switch out of our live mode and say goodnight to everyone. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you.
Damon, would you mind switching us out of live mode, out of record?
Yeah, give me 1 second, okay?
Thank you.
Hang on just 1 second.
That was recorded. Oh, well.
It's a good thing.
I was thinking maybe we should, since we'll be continuing virtually for a while, try to do a little more of a discussion after, which is something
All
that
right,
we
Ethel, the recording is stopped, but we're still streaming.
Oh,
I
We
can't
are
seem to
still
stop the streaming. Yeah, we're still streaming.
Okay.
We're streaming. So
We
you know,
can't stop the
it's
streaming.
done recording. I cannot on this Zoom.
Okay.
The only thing
Okay.
that's going to end the stream is to end the meeting.
Okay. Got you. Well, we'll continue our conversation in another venue, I suppose, then, my friends.
Without moving a muscle.
Yes, exactly. The same venue. Thank you so much. It was great to see you both. It's better than nothing anyway.
it was
Oh,
great. And
yeah.
Carole, your work is beautiful. Really was wonderful to hear you read.
And yours too. I mean, utterly heartbreaking and beautiful. And we were a good team, really.
Yeah, yes, something was in the air,
Yeah, something is in the air. Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't have any technical glitches. Imagine that. So
Well, I felt bad, but all of a sudden my screen went blank, so I saw nothing, and so
we didn't see that.
We saw you and heard
Yeah.
you all the way through unbroken.
all right. Well, it startled me, and I thought, now what do I do? Oh, good.
Well, I'll be in touch with both of you. I hope we can talk more.
I know.
Yeah.
I would love to talk. I didn't know whether to leave time for a Q&A. I didn't realize how the audience thing would be set up or if that made any sense, but I just, was open for it or not, it was
I'm
fine.
glad that you said a little bit and that both of you framed what you're doing and explained. So I think that was perfect.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it is something I'm thinking of maybe incorporating in the future. It seems like
even if you're the questioner and you're having a kind of, because it'd be hard to get in.
Yeah.
I can't read the chats and concentrate on
I think
anything.
that's chaotic. Right. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Just,
Yeah.
5 minutes of a discussion afterwards or 10 minutes of So
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree with my
Yeah, I always love them, and I think people like them too. I
Yeah.
think it gives them a little bit of time to, sort of go back and sort of think about what they've heard in terms of the reading. And I think it often it's like a talk back after you've seen a play. It just allows a little bit more time to process it. And
I agree.
that also, I think, triggers some questions that are oftentimes very interesting. And
Yeah, and it's one of the nice things about the silver linings of doing it this way, because I feel like when we're, in a hall and people are getting sort of antsy in their seats, it's not always a good idea, but in this context,
right.
it could work really well. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it was just so useful to hear out loud something I've never heard. So it's hugely helpful to just,
Yeah.
think, well, did I really get that subway scene right? Because that was so intense. And I never felt that way. And so it became so interesting to well, how do you actually, pull that off for real? So
It was
I think
really
the
vivid.
jury's still out a little. I'm going to keep working on it.
No, I think it was great, and it was so generous of you to read, both of you, to read some new work, and I always feel like that makes for the best readings.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, then you can really, as the reader, be invested in the reading because
Yeah.
you're learning things, and I've
Yeah.
got my red pen out and everything.
Those little epiphanies that happen as you are
Yeah.
reading. Yeah, I know. But it is helpful to hear it aloud, even though I sit in front of the computer with pen and paper and I'm whispering and reading it aloud to myself. It's a
Mhm.
whole different thing
Right.
to actually
Right.
read it in this.
Right.
And it's exciting for people. I mean, I remember when Young Lee was here a few years ago, and he read at that point entirely new work that was sort of unfinished, and no one was expecting it. And just like with you, people had read his work, and so it was exciting to hear something that they didn't know.
Mhm.
So I always think that's the most generous and exciting thing for an audience.
Yeah. I also think that, attention span is different on Zoom. So I think our reading was a good length in terms of that.
Definitely.
Let people.
Yeah, I kind of wish that you had both gone a little longer, but I agree. It's better to go too short.
Yeah, I didn't know because you said 20 to 30 minutes. So I wanted to be really careful about.
Perfect. No, it was perfect. I was
You
just
told me
feeling,
10
I
to
was just
15,
being
so
greedy.
I timed it. I took 2 poems out right before I came
It
downstairs.
was
I thought,
perfect.
no, this is 17 minutes, and
Yeah.
Great fun.
Thank you
Thank
both
you
so
much.
much.
all right.
Thank you.
so much.
It's wonderful to see you, Ethel. Have a good holiday.
To be continued.
Yeah, enjoy your puppy.
Oh, thank you. I will. I'll send pictures.
Send pictures.
Right
More
to
than you
me.
want to see, and videos.
Oh, absolutely. Rosie, what could be better?
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Carole.
Bye.